When Robert Hastings, a wealthy industrialist known as much for his sharp business acumen as his harsh family governance, died unexpectedly of a heart attack, his sprawling estate wasn't the only legacy left in turmoil. The unveiling of his will was anticipated to be a straightforward affair, given Robert's reputation for meticulousness. Instead, it revealed a maze of complexities and unexpected clauses that pitched his 4 children and their respective families into a bitter conflict that threatened to fracture their bonds permanently. The reading of the will, held in the somber, wood-paneled family office, turned chaotic as soon as the executor, a longtime legal associate of Robert, pronounced the contents. The bulk of Robert's assets were to be divided not equally but proportionally, based on what Robert perceived as each child's contribution and loyalty to the family business. This subjective allocation became the spark that ignited deep-seated resentments. The eldest son, who had been estranged from the family after numerous failed attempts to start his own ventures, was left with a nominal inheritance, intensifying his grievances and sense of betrayal. Adding to the volatile mix were specific conditions attached to the inheritances. The grandchildren's shares were to be held in trust until they reached the age of 30, a stipulation that irked their parents, who felt undermined and infantilized by posthumous strings. Robert's youngest daughter, who had taken the reins of the family business in her father's declining years, was designated the majority stakeholder, a decision that her siblings condemned as unduly influenced by her proximity to their father during his final days. The disparity in the inheritance allocations set off a series of clandestine meetings and alliances among the siblings, each maneuvering to challenge the will's validity and assert their claims. Accusations flew, dredging up decades of old wounds and perceived slights, turning family gatherings into battlegrounds of verbal sparring. The feud not only divided the siblings but began to ripple through the next generation, who were pulled into the fray by allegiance or opposition. As lawyers were engaged and legal challenges mounted, the family estate, once a symbol of their collective success and unity, became the arena for a full-blown litigation battle. The stakes were high, not just financially but emotionally, as the conflict threatened to erase any remaining semblance of family unity. In this high-tension narrative, the Hastings family found themselves at a crossroads: either navigate the treacherous waters of legal battles and potentially irreparable personal relations, or find a way to bridge their divides before the legacy of their patriarch could do more harm than good. This opening chapter sets the stage for a saga where legal intrigue intertwines with the complex dynamics of familial love and rivalry. The Hastings family feud took a sharp turn 3 weeks after the patriarch's will was read, when a hidden safe was discovered behind a false panel in Robert's private study. The revelation came about by accident when the youngest son, Jonathan, a curious architect with a penchant for historical renovations, was assessing the estate for necessary repairs and renovations. The discovery immediately halted all work as the entire family convened to witness the opening of the safe, hoping it might contain items or documents that could redefine the terms of their inheritance. The contents of the safe were more enigmatic than anyone had anticipated. Inside, there were several old stock certificates, deeds to properties that were not listed in the current assets of Robert's estate, and a sealed envelope marked with a strict admonition, to be opened only in the event of my death. The implications of these findings were manifold. The stock certificates were from tech startups and green energy companies, sectors Robert had publicly criticized as unworthy of investment due to their volatility. This hidden portfolio suggested a secretive, speculative side to the man they thought they understood. The deeds complicated the estate further, revealing properties in 3 different countries. This international aspect introduced a slew of legal complications and potential tax implications that none of the siblings were prepared to handle. The properties ranged from a vineyard in France to a beachfront villa in Thailand and a historic townhouse in New York City, each carrying its own set of challenges and potential fortunes. However, it was the sealed envelope that held the family's rapt attention. When opened, it revealed a letter penned by Robert himself, explaining his rationale behind the seemingly capricious decisions within his will. He wrote of his desire to teach his children the value of earning, of the pride in building something oneself, and his hope that the surprise assets would serve not as a wedge to further divide them, but as a bridge to new opportunities for cooperation and family unity. Yet, Far from bringing the siblings together, the letter and its revelations only fueled the fires of discontent. Debates erupted over the validity of the letter, with some claiming it was another example of Robert's manipulation from beyond the grave. Accusations about who knew of the safe and its contents prior to its discovery were hurled, particularly at the family lawyer, who had been unusually evasive when questioned about additional assets. With the stakes heightened by these newfound assets, the siblings each began to reevaluate their strategies. Legal teams were bolstered, and private investigators were hired to delve into Robert's secretive financial life. The discovery of the safe did not bring resolution but instead opened new battlegrounds, as each sibling grappled not just for their share of the inheritance but for control over the narrative of their father's life and legacy. As the inheritance saga continued to unfold, it was clear that the road to reconciliation was growing ever more distant, with each revelation adding complexity to an already tumultuous dispute. This twist in the story set the stage for deeper explorations of trust, betrayal, and the hidden layers within personal legacies. As the discovery of hidden assets reignited disputes among the Hastings siblings, their conflict inevitably escalated into a series of legal battles concerning the validity of their father's will. The courtroom became the new arena where familial grievances were aired and legal arguments meticulously crafted to undermine each sibling's claim to the estate. The initial hearings focused on the fundamental legality of the will, its execution, and whether Robert Hastings had been of sound mind and free from undue influence when he drafted the document. The eldest daughter, Catherine, spearheaded the challenge against the will's validity. Her argument hinged on her father's mental state during the last months of his life, suggesting that his decisions were influenced by his declining health and potentially by those closest to him, notably her younger sister, Elaine, who had been named the majority stakeholder. Catherine presented medical records, expert testimonies from neurologists, and witnesses to her father's erratic behavior in his final days. Her legal team argued that the will did not reflect Robert's true intentions and that he may have been manipulated into making decisions that did not align with his established values and previous statements regarding his estate. In response, Elaine's defense was robust, showcasing video evidence of Robert lucidly discussing his will and the reasons for his specific allocations. These recordings, made by Robert's legal advisor during the drafting of the will, showed a clear and coherent Robert explaining the rationale behind his decisions, including the contentious proportional asset distribution. Elaine argued that her father's decisions were made with full awareness of their potential to cause dispute but were ultimately designed to reward dedication to the family business and to encourage personal development among his progeny. Meanwhile, the middle brother, Michael, focused his efforts on the newly discovered assets. His legal approach was less about challenging the will's validity and more about ensuring that these assets were appropriately considered in the estate's distribution. Michael's lawyers raised questions about the potential existence of other undisclosed assets and called for a more thorough investigation into Robert's financial affairs, suggesting that the estate might be larger and even more complex than anyone realized. The courtroom proceedings were exhaustive and emotionally charged, with each day bringing forth more revelations about the family dynamics. Witnesses ranged from former business associates to household staff, each adding layers to the portrait of Robert Hastings as a man whose public persona as a stern and fair businessman belied a private life filled with secrecy and manipulation. As the legal battle waged on, the family found themselves drawn into a vortex of legal expenses and public scrutiny. The proceedings not only deepened the rifts between the siblings but also began to affect their personal lives and professional relationships, casting a long shadow over their interactions and their individual futures. The legal saga surrounding the Hastings family's inheritance became a cautionary tale of wealth and legacy, underscoring the complexities that arise when familial love intersects with vast economic interests, and how the law intervenes to untangle the ties that bind as much as they break. The Hastings family legal battles had already drawn much attention and had drained both emotional and financial resources when an unexpected twist occurred. Just as the court was about to make preliminary judgments on the validity of the will and the proper handling of the newly discovered assets, two long-lost siblings, Alexandra and Peter, who had been estranged from the family for over a decade, made a sudden and dramatic reappearance. Their return was not just a shock, but also a potential game-changer in the ongoing legal proceedings. Alexandra and Peter had left the family under acrimonious circumstances years ago, after a major fallout with their father, Robert, over his strict parenting and business management styles. They had since lived abroad, with minimal contact with any family members, effectively erasing themselves from the family narrative until news of their father's death and the subsequent inheritance disputes lured them back. Their claim to the estate was rooted in a previous version of Robert's will, dated several years before his last, and in which they had been included. Alexandra produced this earlier will during a dramatic moment in the courtroom, claiming that it represented their father's true intentions before he was allegedly swayed by those around him who stood to gain from his later decisions. The siblings' re-entry into the Hastings drama was met with mixed reactions. Some family members viewed their return as opportunistic, questioning their sudden interest in the family's affairs after years of disinterest and distance. Others saw it as a rightful reclaiming of their place in the family lineage, arguing that they deserved a share of the estate irrespective of past conflicts. Their legal representation emphasized their disconnection from recent family biases and dramas, presenting them as unbiased claimants who had not influenced Robert's later life or decisions. They argued that the presence of a previous will highlighted the instability of Robert's decision-making process over the years, possibly influenced by fluctuating health and internal family pressures. This new development forced a re-evaluation of the ongoing legal strategies by all involved. The court had to consider the implications of multiple wills and the legal standing of each. Expert testimony was called upon to discern the authenticity and legal weight of the documents presented, extending the timeline of the dispute further. The return of Alexandra and Peter reopened old wounds and necessitated new alliances within the family. Negotiations that had been edging towards settlements were disrupted, and the litigation landscape became even more complex. The siblings had to navigate not only their legal battles, but also the personal reconciliation with a family they had left behind, each interaction fraught with years of unspoken grievances and unresolved tensions. As the court adjourned to deliberate on these new developments, the Hastings family faced not only a tangled legal battle, but also the daunting prospect of mending deep emotional rifts. The saga highlighted the painful reality that inheritance disputes can sometimes force a confrontation with past hurts and the need for healing beyond the courtroom. In the midst of legal wrangling and the return of estranged family members, the Hastings inheritance saga took another dramatic turn when a batch of old letters, hidden in a forgotten drawer in Robert Hastings' study, was discovered by a family historian compiling a biography. The letters, written by Robert to various confidants and advisors over the years, contained candid reflections on his family, his business, and his evolving feelings towards both. These personal musings, never intended for public consumption, shed new light on his relationships with his children and revealed his doubts about the future of his empire. The letters depicted a man torn between his desire for control and his understanding of his own mortality. In several letters, Robert expressed deep reservations about his children's ability to manage the family business without succumbing to greed and infighting. His words were stark, at times harsh, reflecting a cynicism about the motivations of those around him, including those he loved most. These revelations were particularly damaging to Elaine, who had been portrayed in the courtroom as the dutiful daughter. In one letter, Robert confessed to an old friend his concerns about Elaine's ability to lead, fearing that her seeming loyalty was more about securing her own future than about preserving his legacy. This discovery catalyzed a shift in public and familial perception during the proceedings. The siblings who had been marginalized in the will seized upon the letters as evidence that Robert's state of mind was conflicted and that he might have been unduly pessimistic or influenced when making his final decisions. They argued that the sentiments expressed in these letters should influence the court's understanding of Robert's intentions, suggesting that his final will might not have reflected his true desires if he had doubts about the very premises upon which he based his bequests. Conversely, Elaine's legal team faced the challenge of contextualizing the letters as private venting, not meant to dictate legal outcomes or represent his final and actionable thoughts on his estate. They emphasized the need to distinguish between personal doubts and legal intentions, arguing that the will, formally witnessed and legally executed, represented his rational and definitive wishes. The letters became a focal point in the legal debates, with experts in psychology and handwriting analysis brought in to testify about their authenticity and the implications of their content. Media coverage intensified, framing the dispute as not just a legal battle but as a public airing of a prominent family's most private moments. The court had to carefully consider the relevance of personal sentiments versus formal legal declarations in determining the outcome of the estate. As the case progressed, the letters also forced the siblings to confront not just the financial implications of their father's death, but the emotional reality of his doubts and fears about their capacities and motives. This added emotional weight strained their interactions, pushing them to consider not just what they might gain or lose materially, but how their relationships would endure beyond the courtroom battles. Amid the revelations and disputes over Robert Hastings' will, the fate of the Hastings estate, a sprawling historical mansion that had been in the family for generations, emerged as a pivotal issue in the inheritance saga. The estate, more than just a valuable asset, was a symbol of the family's legacy and a repository of their collective memories. As the legal battles unfolded, the question of who would inherit the estate became not just a matter of financial interest, but one of emotional significance to all parties involved. The mansion, renowned for its architectural beauty and expansive grounds, had been meticulously maintained and was often the backdrop for family gatherings and public charity events. However, its upkeep required substantial financial commitment, a fact that Robert had considered when drafting his will. In the will, Robert had stipulated that the estate should go to the child who showed the most dedication to preserving the family legacy, a clause that had been vaguely worded and left much room for interpretation. Elaine, already holding the majority stake in the business, saw herself as the natural successor to the estate, arguing that her leadership in the family business demonstrated her commitment to her father's legacy. However, her claim was contested by her siblings, particularly Catherine, who argued that her own contributions to managing the family's public and charitable engagements were just as crucial to maintaining the family's social standing and legacy. The discovery of the compromising letters had weakened Elaine's position, with her siblings using Robert's expressed doubts about her motives as a lever to sway the court's opinion. They argued that Elaine's desire to control the estate was driven more by self-interest than by a genuine commitment to its preservation. As the debate over the estate intensified, the siblings were forced to articulate what the family legacy meant to each of them. They presented competing visions for the future of the estate, ranging from turning it into a public museum or a luxury hotel to keeping it as a private residence that continued to serve as the family's heart. The court was tasked with interpreting Robert's intentions based on the conflicting evidence about his state of mind and his children's merits. The emotional testimony about childhood memories, the importance of family traditions, and the potential of the estate to either unite or further divide the family painted a complex picture for the judge to consider. Ultimately, the decision would hinge not just on legal arguments but also on the emotional resonance of what the estate represented: continuity or change, unity or division, preservation or transformation of the Hastings legacy. As the inheritance dispute dragged on, the Hastings siblings found themselves embroiled in a particularly contentious aspect of the case: accusations of undue influence exerted over their father in his final days. These allegations became central to the dispute, especially in light of the disparities in the will and the secretive adjustments made shortly before Robert's death. Catherine, who had been at the forefront of challenging the will's validity, presented evidence suggesting that Elaine had exclusive access to their father during his vulnerable last months, raising suspicions about her influence over his decisions. Catherine pointed to phone records, emails, and testimony from household staff that indicated a pattern of Elaine isolating Robert from other family members, coinciding with significant changes to the distribution of assets in the will. Elaine, defending her actions, argued that her presence was purely out of concern and necessity, as she was the only sibling living close enough to manage their father's care and business affairs. She countered the accusations with her own evidence of her siblings' lack of involvement and interest in their father's well-being, framing her actions as the responsibilities of a devoted daughter rather than manipulative intentions. The court sessions were charged with emotional testimonies from both sides. Family friends, business associates, and medical personnel were brought in to testify about Robert's mental state and his relationships with his children. A particularly poignant moment occurred when the family doctor testified about Robert's cognitive health, suggesting that while he had moments of confusion, he was largely capable of making informed decisions about his estate. Amidst this, Peter and Alexandra's lawyers capitalized on the situation to argue that the environment created by the siblings' rivalry and the alleged manipulative tactics used by Elaine had compromised the integrity of any decisions made by Robert regarding his will. They pushed for a complete reevaluation of the inheritance distribution, suggesting that the only fair resolution was to revert to the earlier will where all siblings were more evenly included. As these accusations unfolded in court, the siblings had to confront not just the legal implications of their actions, but also the moral and ethical questions about their roles in their father's life and decisions. The accusations strained their relationships further, casting a shadow of doubt and betrayal that seemed to extend beyond the immediate legal issues at hand. The legal battle over undue influence not only complicated the inheritance dispute but also deepened the emotional wounds within the family, making the prospect of any future reconciliation seem increasingly unlikely. The court had to carefully weigh the evidence of undue influence against the backdrop of a complex family dynamic and the legal standards that govern such claims. The role of the executor, traditionally a position of trust and impartiality, became another focal point of the Hastings inheritance dispute. The executor, Martin Andrews, a longtime legal advisor to Robert Hastings and a partner at a prestigious law firm, faced serious accusations from several of the Hastings siblings, who alleged that he had not only failed in his duties but had actively colluded with Elaine to manipulate the estate's distribution. The suspicions about Martin's conduct were fueled by his close personal and professional relationship with Elaine, who had appointed him as the family's primary legal counsel in the years leading up to Robert's death. This relationship was scrutinized in court, with Catherine and Michael presenting emails and financial records suggesting that Martin had received substantial fees and gifts from Elaine, which they claimed were bribes for securing her a favorable position in the will. Moreover, Jonathan uncovered discrepancies in the estate's financial records during the time Martin was executor, including unexplained withdrawals and transfers. These findings led to allegations of theft and mismanagement, prompting a forensic audit of the estate's accounts. The audit revealed several irregularities that Martin struggled to explain satisfactorily, further damaging his credibility and intensifying the legal battle. In response to these serious accusations, the court ordered a temporary suspension of Martin's duties as executor, appointing an independent fiduciary to oversee the estate while the investigation continued. Martin defended his actions, asserting that all transactions and decisions were made in good faith and with Robert's best interests in mind. He claimed that the gifts and payments were customary expressions of gratitude for his service and denied any wrongdoing. As part of his defense, Martin presented detailed records and documentation intended to demonstrate that his actions were transparent and aligned with legal and ethical standards. He also provided personal testimony about his relationship with Robert, describing it as one of mutual respect and professional camaraderie, not undue influence or collusion. The scrutiny of Martin's role brought another layer of complexity and delay to the resolution of the estate. The siblings were forced to confront not only their grievances against each other, but also the possibility that their father's trusted advisor might have betrayed their trust. This revelation prompted a broader reflection on the nature of loyalty and integrity within their father's inner circle, complicating their feelings about the will and each other. As the legal proceedings drew out, the family dynamics grew increasingly strained. The once united siblings found themselves embroiled in a conflict that seemed to expand with each new revelation, moving further away from the possibility of any amicable resolution. The courtroom became a venue for airing not just legal grievances but deep personal betrayals, reflecting the complex interplay of family loyalty, legacy, and loss. As the legal disputes dragged on, consuming vast amounts of time, money, and emotional energy, the broader impact on the Hastings family became painfully clear. The ongoing public scrutiny and the strain of the court proceedings prompted some family members to reconsider the path of relentless litigation. This shift in perspective, combined with the encouragement of the presiding judge, led to an initiative to try mediation as a means to resolve the conflict outside the courtroom. The mediation process was facilitated by an experienced mediator known for handling high-stake family disputes. The initial sessions were tense, with each sibling bringing deep-seated grievances and suspicions. The mediator worked to establish a basic level of trust and communication, focusing the group on shared goals rather than past conflicts. The objective was to find a resolution that preserved both the family's legacy and their personal relationships, recognizing that a legal victory for one could mean a relational loss for all. During the mediation, each sibling had the opportunity to express their individual perspectives and concerns about the estate and each other. Elaine spoke about her commitment to the family business and her fear of seeing her father's life work dismantled. Catherine shared her feelings of being undervalued and her desire for recognition of her contributions to the family's social standing. Michael and Jonathan discussed their need for transparency and fairness in the distribution of assets, including the newly discovered properties. Alexandra and Peter voiced their sense of exclusion and their desire for reintegration into the family. The mediator guided the siblings through a series of exercises designed to rebuild empathy and understanding. This process uncovered common ground, as all acknowledged a deep-seated desire to honor their father's legacy in a way that reflected his values and the family's history. The mediator also helped them explore practical solutions for the estate that involved shared stewardship of key assets like the ancestral home, possibly converting it into a family trust overseen by a committee of siblings rather than placing control with one individual. As the mediation sessions progressed, tentative agreements began to form. These included proposals for the division of the estate that were more balanced and took into consideration the personal and professional interests of each sibling. The mediator also suggested setting up a family council to manage ongoing concerns and disputes, aiming to prevent future conflicts from escalating to the point of legal intervention. The move towards mediation did not resolve all the issues, and deep-seated mistrust and hurt remained obstacles. However, it provided a framework for negotiation that was less adversarial than the court proceedings. The siblings began to see the potential benefits of a settlement that would allow them to move forward, both individually and collectively. As the mediation drew to a close, the family faced the challenge of turning these tentative agreements into a formal, binding resolution that could be ratified in court. This phase was crucial, as it would determine whether the fragile truce would hold and if the Hastings could begin the difficult process of healing and rebuilding their relationships. As the mediation concluded, the Hastings family approached the final court hearing with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The mediation had offered a glimpse of reconciliation, but the binding nature of the court's decision still held the power to undo the fragile peace. The final hearing was not only a legal formality but also a moment of truth for the family, testing whether the compromises reached could withstand the rigors of legal scrutiny and personal resolve. The court was presented with the mediated agreement that proposed a more equitable distribution of assets, including the formation of a family trust to manage the ancestral estate and several other significant properties. The agreement also outlined roles for each sibling in the family business, aiming to utilize each person's strengths and interests in a way that Robert Hastings might have appreciated but failed to orchestrate in his will. The judge, who had presided over this case with increasing concern for the family's fragmentation, commended the siblings for their efforts to find common ground. In her closing remarks, she emphasized the importance of preserving not just the financial wealth, but also the relational fabric of the family. She approved the agreement, with minor modifications, and legally endorsed the establishment of the Family Council, stressing its role in fostering ongoing communication and resolving future disputes. As the final decree was issued, there was a palpable sense of relief mixed with sober realization among the siblings. They understood that the court's decision was just the beginning of a more challenging journey towards genuine reconciliation. The scars from the dispute were deep, and while the legal resolution provided a framework for moving forward, the emotional healing would take time and effort from all involved. In the weeks that followed, the Hastings family began the process of implementing the court's decisions. The Family Council held its first meeting, with an independent mediator present to help guide the initial discussions. The focus was on setting up transparent governance for the family assets and establishing clear communication channels to avoid misunderstandings. Despite the initial awkwardness and residual bitterness, there was a cautious optimism. The siblings started to engage with each other not just as co-heirs, but as individuals with a shared history and a common interest in honoring their family legacy. They organized a family retreat, facilitated by a professional specializing in family dynamics, to work on rebuilding trust and understanding. As time passed, the Hastings family found that their new structure allowed for more balanced involvement in decision-making, which gradually improved their interactions. The family estate, once a symbol of contention, began hosting regular gatherings again, now celebrations of their collective effort to maintain and cherish it. The saga of the Hastings inheritance ended not with a definitive reconciliation, but with the hopeful beginning of one. It underscored the complexity of family and legacy, the challenges of interpreting a loved one's final wishes, and the profound impact of empathy and effort in healing familial wounds.